I never thought I'd end up here. Standing in the heart of Manchester on a grey October morning in 1853, watching smoke from 1,000 factory chimneys turn the sky into something between coal and ash. My name is Mike Harrison. 6 months ago, I was nobody, just another farm boy from Lancashire whose family lost everything when the harvests failed. But Manchester? Manchester was different. Manchester was possibility. I remember the first time I saw it from the hills. The city sprawled before me like a living, breathing creature chimneys reaching toward heaven, machinery echoing across valleys, canals cutting through the landscape like veins, pumping lifeblood into the greatest industrial city the world had ever seen. They called it Cottonopolis, Britain's workshop, the place where the future was being built, one steam engine at a time. My father warned me, "Mike, that city will chew you up and spit you out. It's no place for decent folk." But what choice did I have? Manchester offered something our farm never could: opportunity. The streets pulsed with energy. Irish immigrants fresh off the boats, Welsh miners seeking wages, Jewish merchants haggling in Yiddish, German engineers discussing machinery designs. I heard a dozen languages before I'd walked a dozen blocks. I found lodging in Ancoats. They called it Little Ireland. My room was barely larger than a closet, shared with 3 other men working the mills. We slept in shifts. The walls were thin enough to hear every cough, every cry from families packed into neighboring rooms. But you know what? None of us complained, because we were here. We were part of something bigger. My first job was as a piecer at Murray's Mill on Union Street. The foreman looked me up and down and said, "You've got quick hands, boy. You might last a week." That was his idea of encouragement. The mill floor was hell on earth that first day. The noise hit you like a physical force, hundreds of machines clattering, gears grinding, overseers shouting. The air was thick with cotton dust that got into your lungs, your eyes, your throat. By the end of my first shift, I was coughing up white fluff. By the end of the first week, I didn't even notice it anymore. You adapted or you left. But here's what nobody tells you about those mills. They were magnificent. Watching hundreds of spindles turning in perfect synchronization, seeing raw cotton transformed into thread that would clothe people across the British Empire, it was like witnessing a miracle of human ingenuity. We were making something. We were building the modern world with our own hands. Survival in Manchester required more than just showing up to work. You needed connections. You needed friends. That's how I met Sarah O'Brien. She worked in the weaving room. Red hair tied back under a kerchief, hands moving across the loom with a grace that seemed impossible given the brutal nature of the work. "You're the new piecer, aren't you? Still got all your fingers, I see. That's something. This city breaks you down, but it also builds you back up stronger. You just have to decide who you want to become." The months that followed tested everything I had. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I saw men lose fingers in the machinery, children get crushed by falling bales of cotton. Some weeks I was so exhausted I could barely remember my own name. But I also saw something else: innovation, progress. And I took Sarah's advice. I started attending evening classes at the Mechanics Institute. Gentlemen, you work with machines every day. But do you understand them? Knowledge is power. Knowledge is freedom. I soaked it up like cotton soaking up dye. I learned about gear ratios and steam pressure, about the economics of textile production. I began to see the mill not just as a place of toil, but as a complex system, a marvel of organization and engineering. 6 months in, I was promoted to spinner. Better pay, better conditions, and most importantly, respect. But Manchester taught me something beyond survival and advancement. It taught me about solidarity. When the mill owners tried to cut our wages that winter, we organized. Workers from a dozen different mills, meeting in secret. Irish and English, men and women, Young and old, all of us united by the simple principle that our labor had value. The strike lasted 2 weeks, 2 weeks without wages. The newspapers called us troublemakers. The owners threatened to replace us. But we held firm. And in the end, we won. Not everything we wanted, but enough. Enough to prove that together, we had power. Standing on those steps the night we reached our agreement, looking at that crowd of workers tired, hungry, but unbowed, I felt something I'd never felt on my father's farm. I felt like I was part of history. Manchester in the 1850s wasn't perfect. God knows it wasn't perfect. The air was toxic. The housing was overcrowded. The work was dangerous. I walked past mansions where mill owners lived in luxury I couldn't imagine, while families starved in slums a mile away. The Irk River ran black with industrial waste. Children worked beside us, their childhood stolen for profit. But here's what I want you to understand. Manchester was also hope. It was the place where a farm boy with nothing could become a skilled worker, could educate himself, could build a life. It was where people from across Britain and across Europe could come together, share ideas, create community. Where the future was being invented, not just industrial technology, but new ways of organizing society, new ideas about workers' rights, about what was possible. Every thread we spun, every piece of cloth we wove it, went out into the world. To America, to India, to Australia. Manchester cloth dressed workers in New York and aristocrats in Paris. We were Britain's workshop, yes, but we were also the world's workshop, and we were proud of it. My father was wrong about Manchester. It didn't chew me up and spit me out. It forged me in its furnaces, shaped me on its shop floors, tempered me through its struggles. I came here with nothing. Now I have skills, I have community, I have purpose. That's the real story of Manchester in the 1850s. Not just the mills and the machines, not just the smoke and the statistics. It's the story of millions of people like me coming from nowhere, building something from nothing, creating the modern world one shift at a time. They call this place Britain's workshop. But to me, it's the place where I became who I was always meant to be. And tomorrow morning, when that factory whistle blows at 6 a.m., I'll be there, ready to work, ready to build, ready to be part of something greater than myself. That's Manchester. That's my story. And it's only just beginning.